I have two spots that I put stuff. I can usually find my stuff. Nobody touches it. Yeah, there's that too. All right. We are in Judges 16. Judges chapter 16. I gave you, you should have all the notes for chapter 16. It ended up being 6 pages or 5 pages long, I don't remember. Several pages. It's still a fairly short chapter, but there's a lot that happens in this chapter. We've had a lot to talk about when we talk about Samson, for sure. And so this chapter, of course, is probably the most famous with regards to Samson, because it's the section on Samson and Delilah, and of course his death later on. And so let's start with reading verse. Let's see, 1 through 5. Somebody want to do that?
Then went Samson to Gaza, and saw there a harlot, and went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, In the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of an hill that is before Hebron. And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver.
All right, so Samson, verse 1, went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. This, of course, he went down to Gaza, which Gaza is one of the 5 lordship principal cities. And Gaza's been in our news a lot, so we know where that's at for the most part, Gaza City. But this city is one of the old principal cities of the Philistines, one of the 5. There's Gaza, there's Gad, there's Ashkelon, not Gad, Ashkelon. There's several. They're not all on our list. I don't remember all of the exact names. But there's 5 cities. We'll see all 5 of those principal cities later on in the time of David, because of when the Ark of the Covenant gets, or Samuel, when the Ark of the Covenant gets stolen or taken in battle, it moves to each one of those cities, and something bad happens in every one of them. Each one of those cities had a small g god that they worshipped, and so we'll see those later. But here Samson goes to Gaza, and he finds a harlot, and this really seems to be a reoccurring problem for Samson. This is the 3rd time he has done this, in finding someone and spending time with them. And it's when I read this, I think about each time he does this, he goes to the Philistines. He goes out of Israel. Why do you think that's the case? He's hiding what he's doing. He's not going to go through the cities of Israelites that he knows, people that may know him. He's trying to hide his sin. And that's terrible. I mean, it's what he's doing. When I was thinking about this, studying this, I thought about the phrase, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, when people use that term, that phrase. And that's what he's doing. He's thinking that I'm going to go to this nation, this other place that nobody knows me, well, that's not known to my family, whatever the case may be. And I'm going to do this sinful thing, and nobody's going to know. Well, who still knows? God does. And it causes more problems for him anyways, because as we're going to see, his sin finds him out. This problem that he keeps having is going to cause issues for him down the road. And so this is a terrible way to navigate his life, and his sin is going to find him out. And so, verse 2, it says, when the Gazites were told Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning when it is daylight, we will kill him. And so they surround the house. They wanted to kill him. They knew who Samson was. They knew he had been a problem for them already. And they thought, well, let's shut the doors of the city. Let's get everything surrounded. We'll surround him. We'll make sure that he can't leave. And when the morning comes and daylight, we're going to kill him. Well, this included the gate. It says at the night of the gate of the city. Now, which gate it was? Now, I didn't realize this, but there was usually more than one gate in a lot of these cities. So there'd be a gate that would include it'd be big enough for people to drive carts through and bring things into the city. But then there would also be a gate that it may be close to it, maybe beside it, that people just walk through. And so which gate that is, we're not told. And when you think about later what happens, he carries the gate out of the city. Well, it depends on which gate it is. Either one is a great feat of what he does here. But we think about which gate it could be. It could be either one. I think it's probably more along the lines of the smaller gate that he is going to walk through later. And so verse 3, it says, and Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two gate posts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. And so Samson, he stays with her until midnight. They expected him to stay all night, but at midnight he decides to leave. Maybe again he's trying to hide his sin, right? He's trying to leave at night so nobody would know. And so here again, he leaves. He's going to leave the city, finds everything is shut up. And so he takes the door of the gate, and not only the gate, but he takes the two gate posts with him. What would that be like? What does that mean, the gate posts there?
Buried in the ground.
Yeah, they were buried in the ground. You think about that door back there. We don't have gate posts to that door, but there is support posts on each side that the door hangs on. And he didn't just take the gate off its hinges. He took and grabbed a hold of the posts and pulled them up and carried them out. The whole thing. And so, yeah, it's buried in the ground. That's going to be pretty, normal person is not going to be able to do that. Now, it's interesting because in every other occasion of when he had a strength to do something, it always said the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. That didn't happen here. So it's interesting. This is the one time, but it happened with the foxes, and we talked about that when he captured all the foxes, that it didn't say that either, but that was a pretty great feat to do, to capture 300 foxes and be able to tie their tails together. And so here, was he strong, but not to the point of what he was able to do when God was with him? I don't know. It's just interesting. This is not something a normal person is going to be able to do. We're not going to be able to go just pull the gate posts out of the ground unless it was really muddy and wet and they weren't very, very deep. But I don't think that's the case.
Even then, it does make sense if he was pulling up like the man door instead of the vehicle door. But just with how it says it, to me, it really sounds like it would be the larger door, because it said he took hold of the doors.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas normally a man door is going to be a door, 7 feet by
Yeah.
3 or maybe 5 feet wide. But when he took hold of the door and a gate post and pulled them out bar and all, you wouldn't need a bar for a man-sized door.
Yeah.
But you would for a very wide door.
That's a good point, because it's plural doors. It is the large door.
Doors and the whole bar going across.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you went over and grabbed one and grabbed the other and then just dragged the whole thing off.
Yeah. You're probably right. I didn't realize that. And so it would be the large door. And so, or the large gate. Yeah, and he took both of them. He took the whole thing. I know, there's been artist depictions of this. I remember seeing this when I was younger, artist depictions of Samson carrying this. And to me, it's always the picture you get is it's like a metal gate that you can see through, and he's carrying, and the posts are only like this tall or something like that. And that's not the case. That's not going to be something that would secure a city, because you could just jump right over that. Yeah, it had to be a massive door. Yeah, they would have, for sure. And so, this is a protection for the city. They closed the doors to try to protect from people getting in, and they thought it would keep him from getting out. And so this was a feat. And so does that mean that he had strength all the time, but yet he had even a greater amount of strength when God was with him? It could be. This is one of 2 times it's not stated that he has done something pretty amazing that a normal person would not be able to do. So I don't know. I think about that as I get to this chapter, because it doesn't say anything about God coming upon him, but we do see that in the other times that he has done something pretty amazing. But this was something a normal person would not be able to do. And so he takes that gate, and he takes it. It says he puts it on his shoulders and carries it to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. This would be, it could be, who knows how far this was. Some versions say, I think the King James kind of hints towards the fact that he carried it to Hebron, but that's not the case. The New King James translates it better in the sense of he took it to a hill that faced Hebron. And Hebron is in Israel. And so he's getting to the top of the hill, and he can see Hebron from there, from where he's at. And so he carries that top of the hill and drops it down. And of course, they were not able to hold him. Where were these men at that were surrounding him? Well, they were expecting him to leave in the morning, so they were probably asleep. They were probably asleep at where they were at, and was not expecting him to show up in the middle of the night and leave. But he does. He does leave and gets out of there. And so that's the end of that. And so afterwards, verse 4, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, not at any point in this do we see that Samson marries her, or she is his wife. And so the only thing we can assume is that she is, just like all the other times, she's a harlot, probably. But it says here that he loved her. And so verse 4 says he loved her, so he went to the valley of Sorek. This would have been southwest of Jerusalem. It would have been in the Philistine area, so that means Delilah was a Philistine, which makes sense for what we see later. The word Delilah, the name Delilah, means tender or delicate. Kaufman says that her name means a flirtatious or devotee. The later designation suggests religious prostitution as her profession. It doesn't, that's for his definition from his study, but her name definitely means tender, delicate, but it could fit with her lifestyle. We're not told that she's a harlot, but we are told that he found her like he did other times, and she's not his wife, but he's with her. And so Samson, it says, loved her. This was more than just an attraction for Samson this time. He loved her, meaning that he wanted to be with her and stay with her. And of course, this is going to be a problem for him. He's making a poor choice again, isn't he? How many times did Solomon make a poor choice? Yeah, 1 Kings 11, you read 1 through 8, all those poor choices brought about his demise, brought about his end of worshiping God. And so, Samson, he was not concerned with the relationships that he had. He's not had one good relationship we have seen at all, which is amazing from the fact of where he came from. His parents, we talked about how dedicated they were to God, but every choice he made was a bad choice. And Delilah is going to be another bad choice for him. And so we know those passages, 1 Corinthians 15:33, 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 16. They're in your notes, but it talks about the importance of the relationships that we have. And obviously, she was not a good choice. We talked about Delilah at camp. Wasn't last year. It was the year before. It was last year, not this year, the year before. We talked about Delilah and her in the relationship situation there, and how bad it was. It's really, it says that Samson loved her, but not once it says that she loved him. It was one-sided, for sure. And so verse 5, it says, and the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So the leaders, these lords of the Philistines, come to her, and they say, find out what gives him his strength. And because of that, well, for that, they would pay her 1,100 pieces of silver. So think about this. If it is the 5 lordship cities, and so each one of them would have a leader, if it was those 5, how much is she getting? She's getting 5,500 pieces of silver. Now, put that in perspective. Think about in the future, when Judas sold Jesus, betrayed Jesus, how much did he get? 33. So, or 30, yeah, it's 30. 30, sorry. I was thinking, I don't know why I thought 33. 30 pieces, so you're right. So 30 pieces of silver. She was going to get 5,500, possibly, pieces of silver for betraying him. So you can definitely see what her motive was with being with Samson. She wanted to make, it would make her very wealthy, and she wanted that money, and so this is showing that she didn't love him. She was just wanting something, and so she doesn't argue. We don't have any of that conversation. Verse 6 says, Delilah said to Samson, so she immediately goes to Samson, says, please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you. And Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so she comes to him and asks him for what gives him that strength, or what he can do to bind him. And he says, find 7 green vines or branches. The New King James says bowstrings, and that's more like what it's talking about. So you get 7 fresh ones. That means they're not been dried out. They're going to be a lot stronger. They're going to be a little more elastic. He's not going to be, in their minds, be able to break that bound very easy. But was he telling the truth? Of course, no. Right off the bat, what it should have been the red flag for Samson. Yeah. Why would she even ask him? You may think, okay, well, that he loved her. He thought maybe he can confide into her. But if that was the case, every time she asked him, he would have told her. He would, have been like, okay, well, I'm going to tell her. Well, he did in time. But right off the bat, he lies to her immediately. Does this seem to be a history for him? Yeah. He finds a woman that is not a very good choice, is a harlot. Then he ends up right off the bat lying to her, and she's trying to deceive him. What a terrible situation he puts himself in all of the time. And it's because of his bad choices. And so you would think right off the bat he'd go, she's trying to, they're trying, the Philistines have got to her. Because this has happened before, right? The Philistines went to his wife and said, we want to know what this riddle is. And he knew then that they were toying with him. So here again, he knows this. Why in the world does he play along? Yeah, it could be. Maybe he was so arrogant and so confident that he could never be destroyed that he's like, okay, I'll play this game.
His one weakness, though.
It was her.
For the ladies.
He does.
Yeah, that might be crude to say or whatever, but he seems to, because his logic and reasoning seems to go out the window when this happens.
Yes, it does. And that's his problem. And so here, this should have been a red flag for him. He obviously knew what she was doing. He wouldn't have lied to her. But he was willing to stay with her and continue to toy with her. So, maybe he was blinded by his love. That was his struggle. But sometimes, we think about it. Can a person be blinded to the truth of a person that they like or they love? Yeah, it's easy to do. And how many women are beaten and get mistreated by someone, and they still stay with them, unfortunately. And so there's a lot more to that, I know, but I'm just saying, here in this situation, he did not want to see her faults, and so he stayed with her, and it caused problems for him. And so the result, of course, we know what the result's going to be, but verse 8, it says, "So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength was not known." Of course, the result is she binds him. And you look at how did she end up binding him? Well, he was probably asleep, right? That's the only really way. I mean, he's not going to just sit there and go, okay, bind me up and do this. He's asleep. So he must have been a very hard sleeper. Because every time, of course, in the end, when his hair gets shaved, they didn't have razors, so there's not going to be the noise, of his hair getting cut. But how would they have cut his hair? It would have been with, scissors or something, shears, and then a blade. And he slept through that. So he must have been a hard sleeper. Mary very confident that nothing was going to happen to him, so he slept well. I don't know. But it ends up, of course, not being the right thing. The vines were like nothing to him. I like the phrase there. It was like yarn when it touches fire. What happens to it? Just disintegrates, right? And quickly. But these men were in this house hiding. It doesn't say they came out to try to attack him. It doesn't say that she called for them. It says that they were there and it didn't happen. So she must not have called for him. She was waiting to see if he really could break the binding of his hands and feet. And so, verse 10, of course, this continues. Delilah said to Samson, "Look, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now, please tell me what you may be bound with." So he said to her, "If you bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like other men." So she pleads with him again. Of course, this should have been another red flag of why in the world are you asking me this? But, she says, "You're mocking me." Was he mocking her? I think so. Because he's toying with her, right? He knows that she's trying to do something, and he's playing along. So he really was mocking her. So he tells her to bind her with new ropes. Of course, verse 12, that doesn't work. Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And men were lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. Of course, again, he breaks these ropes, and of course, these men did not attack him. I think she was testing to make sure that he was actually bound before they came running. But Kaufman said this: Samson never had the slightest inkling of the mortal danger in which he was placing by this shameful relationship with the treacherous Delilah. Of course, he's playing along. He knows what's going on. But what Kaufman is talking about, he doesn't realize what he's putting himself into for the later case of verse 13 and on. And so, verse 13, so Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks on my head into the web of a loom." So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, The Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he woke from his sleep and pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. And so again, she pleads with him. Clark says probably Samson had his long hair plaited in 7 divisions. And as his vow of a Nazarite obligated him to wear his hair, so 7 being the number of perfection among the Hebrews, his hair being divided into 7 locks, might more particularly point out the perfection designed by his Nazarite state. And so he has 7 bunches of hair. And he tells her, if you take those 7 bunches and you weave them together and tie them, you will be able to capture me. Now, what's interesting is the New King James and the King James. Notice verse 13. He says to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of a loom, is that a hyphen? There's nothing. It ends. It just ends abruptly. Now, if you read the ESV, I'm not sure about the version you had. It has more, doesn't it?
The Berean Study Bible says, he told her, if you weave the 7 braids of my head into the web of a loom and tighten it with a pin, I will become as weak as any other man.
Exactly. And so the ESV does the same thing. And it will complete the sentence. Now, that's exactly what she does. If you look at the next verse, she weaves them and then ties them with a pin. And so how did she know to do that? Well, why in the world the King James, New King James doesn't have that? Maybe because it's not in the transcript that they use, but the Septuagint has it. So the Septuagint had that full, complete sentence that I'm guessing the ESV, the Berean, and others have taken it from to complete that sentence, because it's really interesting that the sentence just ends right there in verse 13. I don't have an answer for that except for it wasn't, maybe it got left out of the Textus Receptus is what the King James and New King James use. I don't know. But that is the complete sentence. And that's exactly what she does. Notice verse 14, she wove it tightly with a batten of a loom. And it says he woke from his sleep and pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. So the batten is that pin. And so she weaved it and secured it, as the sentence states. And so it must, I don't have an answer for that, but it is interesting how it's left out. And so verse 15, and she says to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. So she then starts to pull at his heart, right? She says, if you really love me, you would tell me. Well, does she love him? No, not at all. What she is wanting that money badly. And she is doing everything she can to get him to give her that answer. And so it came to pass, verse 16, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death. There's 3 words there used. Pressed. Well, that really means to prod. She worked on him daily until he couldn't take it anymore. Pester, it means to oppress him. And then it says vexed. Vexed means to cut down. And so he had this barrier. He knew what was going on. He knew he can't give up his secret. And so he had this barrier that he would not allow her to break down until the point that she wore him down because of her pestering, because of her prodding at him and working at him constantly. It finally wore him down. So it broke down that barrier of his heart to allow her to then cause himself to break his covenant with God. And so we see that here. And it was similar to, what his wife did the first time, wasn't it? What did she do the first time? His wife wore him down till he gave the answer. That's exactly what's going on here. And so he was wore down by her actions. And so, temptation, it's always working on that barrier of our heart, isn't it? Somebody read James 1 and verse 14 and 15. There's a lot of similarities here.
14 and 15.
Yep.
But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death.
All right, so temptation does that same thing. This is what it was. It was temptation for him to break his covenant with God, and she was that temptation. She was that one that Satan was using to break him down, to break his covenant with God. And so sin does that. Temptation does that to us today. Same thing. And so, is it right for a wife or a woman to deal with her husband this way? Of course, no.
I don't think she was just saying, tell me your secret, tell me your secret. She was probably saying some pretty horrendous things to him, like, you're a terrible just like
Wearing him down.
chopping at his personality and his character and, like, some women can be really good at. I know, I've seen it in action. But, just that constant picking and needling and just, I don't think it was just, tell me. I think it was probably way worse.
Yeah, and that's what's meant by the words there, and you're right. The word vexed and pester. She was using, using that. She knew his problem was her, and she knew he loved her, and so she used that to get to him. So we'll read Proverbs 21, verse 9. Solomon understood this and wrote about it. Probably should have learned from it, but he didn't.
Better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in the house shared with a contentious woman.
That's that word there, contentious. I think it applies with what you're talking about, is that causing strife, causing problems in that relationship. Verse 19 also of Proverbs 21.
Coming from the Spanish side of things, Lily pointing out that it was manipulative.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, she was being very manipulative to him. Yeah, and doing everything she could. Verse 19 also.
Better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman.
All right, so Solomon says, it is better to dwell in the rooftop or in the wilderness than with a woman that is this way. And why Samson stayed with her, I don't know. Because he loved her. He was blinded by his love for her. Couldn't see past it. And it led to his demise. And so, this definitely, this is not a way a wife should deal with her husband, but it's also, he's in the same boat, right? They were both doing wrong here. She was not his wife, I understand that, but if you think about it in the principle, you can go back to his wife that he actually had. She was manipulative to him and deceptive. He was lying and toying with her. And so they both had a lot of problems here. It wasn't just Delilah. Samson had a lot of issues here too. He was not treating her correctly, and she wasn't treating him correctly. And that's what happens. When a husband and wife do not treat each other the way that God tells us to, it causes problems in the relationship. It causes problems in the home. And so that's what we're seeing here. And so verse 17, she's wore him down. Verse 17, he says that he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like other men. And so he gives up his answer. And verse 18, we'll go with that. It says, when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up once more, for he has told me all his heart. So the Lord of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. And so she could tell that Samson, for some reason, he was actually telling her the truth. It could have been his demeanor. It could have been how he was saying it. It could have been, I don't know. But she could tell that this time he was telling the truth. And so now she calls for the Lord of the Philistines. Now, every other time the men were hiding around there, weren't they? They were there in the home. They were waiting. So it had to have been a period of time that she worked on him to get to this point, which it's fitting with the scripture. So they're not there anymore. They're gone. She's working on him. She finally gets him to that point, so she calls for them to come and tells them what he had told her. And what did they bring with them? The money. And so she called for them because they had the money, and she wanted that money. And so they bring that money to her. You know, how many times has money been an issue for people? You know, think about it. This is a scripture. Let's see, I had it a while back. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10. So let me read that.
For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
All right, so many people, you know, they misquote this passage and say, well, money is the root of all evil. Well, it's not, right? It's the love of money. What is the problem? It's not the inanimate object that can't do anything. It's a tool for the person in their heart. And so a person that lusts and desires for money is going to be tempted by having money and cause problems. Many examples out of Scripture. Judas is one. We've talked about him, right? Money enticed him to betray Jesus. Think about Balaam. Balaam, he was trying to curse God's people, but he wasn't able to do it. But he was getting paid every single time to do this. He was enticed by money. You think about the rich young ruler, Jesus' time. Jesus talking to the rich young ruler. He was very sorrowful when Jesus told him to give up his money. It wasn't the money that was the problem. What was it? His love of that money. That was what was keeping him out of the kingdom. And so the rich fool, of course. And so you think about it. It's the person, it's the heart in that tool. It's the same thing. And talk about, you know, people say, well, guns are a problem. Well, it's the heart of the person, right? It doesn't matter the tool. The tool could be anything, but that heart of that person is what's the problem. And so the heart of her problem was that love of money. And it led to her to deceive him, to hurt that relationship. And of course, that's going to lead to Samson's demise. Not the money, or her love of money, but that his weakness also. And so verse 19, it tells us, verse 19, then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. So she makes him to fall asleep on her knees, and then they shave him, which it's just crazy to me that he could sleep through that. But he slept, he was shaved, and then his strength was gone, right? He was asleep and unaware of the danger that was coming. You know, how many times spiritually people are asleep and unaware of the danger that comes? And we're told many times to be sober, to be aware, to be alert. So was he asleep for the other times that he was bound? Maybe not. Maybe this is the one time he was. Maybe it was a part of his toying with her and letting her bind him and just to see that, you know, to play with her. I don't know. But we do know that being asleep does bring danger. And we see that there's several examples of that also. The disciples, they slept when Jesus prayed. The 5 foolish virgins in that parable. And so he was unaware. And because of that, he lost his strength. Verse 20. It says, and she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he woke from his sleep and said, I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And so when God left, so did his strength. Zur had this statement. It says, this word is from, it's a Hebrew word, and defined by Strong's, it means to shake himself free. A primitive root through the ideal of rustling of mane, which usually accompanies the lion's roar. So this phrase, to shake himself free, continuing on to tumble about, the idea is that is as a lion would roar and shake his mane in his great and majestic strength, so Samson will shake his strength as connected with his long hair like the mane of a lion. And so in his mind, this phrase that's used here, Zer says, it's like a lion that roars and shakes his mane and then goes to fight. That's what Samson was going to do. He was going to go out and yell, or whatever the case may be, and shake himself free, shake his hair, and then attack them. But of course, his strength had left him. And so verse 21, then the Philistines took him and put his eyes out and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after he had been shaven. And so they make him unable to fight, right? They take out his eyes, which is interesting, because what was his problem? His lust of the eyes. And so they take out that weakness for him. Now, Jesus told us in the New Testament that if our eyes cause us to sin, what we were supposed to do. You know, Samson wasn't asking for them to pluck his eyes out to fix his problem, but it did fix his problem, didn't it? Now, he can see clearly. Yeah. He can see for the first time, that's right. You know, he's now has got that problem removed from him. Now he can think clearly, right? Now he can think about his life. Now he can think about his situation and go, I messed up. And we're going to see that. I know we're out of time. We'll see that with Samson's death. But he comes to the realization of what he has done in his life, and that's going to fix his problem. So we'll come back here. I know we're out of time. We'll finish this point out a little bit more, and then we'll talk about his death. Any questions or comments?
Fear of distractions.
Fear of distractions, really. And that's a principle for us. If we've got a distraction, we got to get rid of it, right? So, all right, thank you.